What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Imagine sending your son to war and getting somebody else's body in return, with a forged name tag and a fake backstory, just so that the state can pretend they are not losing. Welcome to Putin's Russia 2025 edition. The propaganda machine is working overtime not just to invent enemies, but now to erase their own dead. I mean, seriously. According to President Zelensky, Russian authorities are dumping their own soldiers' bodies and claiming they are Ukrainians. Some of them even still have Russian passports on them. Seriously, cannot make this stuff up. Is Putin so afraid and desperate to admit the scale of losses? Well, it surely looks like it. But wait, it does get darker. As Ukraine fights to keep its cities intact under swarms of Russian drones, as the battlefield shifts violently near Sumy, and as civilians count bodies in the aftermath of missile strikes, the Kremlin is busy staging political theater in front of world's eyes. They are trading dead ones like expired stock, inflating Ukrainian losses in state media, and pushing the fairy tale that everything, guess what, is under control. So today, let's talk about the body dumping scandal, the psychological warfare of hiding casualties, the halting front lines in Sumy, and why Russia's buffer zone obsession is just another delusional bandage over a festering wound. Here is a twisted question. What happens when the number of dead soldiers becomes politically inconvenient? If you are the regime of Russia, Putin's regime, you repackage the dead as somebody else's problem. According to Zelensky, once again, Ukraine has received at least 20 bodies Russia claimed were Ukrainians. But, oops, well, turns out they were Russians. Sometimes even with passports still in the pockets. Imagine the level of laziness and indifference when those people responsible for shipping them did not even bother to check the pockets of or any other personal belongings they might have had. One of them was even an Israeli citizen fighting for Russia. His body came back as Ukrainian too. But what if it's not just error? What if it's deliberate? What if it is a desperate game to mask the scale of slaughter happening under Putin's name? Well, now we are talking. And this is just what Ukraine has found. What about the bodies no one checks? What about those labeled and stored without even a basic ID? What about the ones quietly burned or buried without fanfare to avoid the paperwork? This is not just negligence. This is industrial scale cover-up. Let's even look at the numbers. On June 2nd, for example, there was a huge prisoner and body swap between Russia and Ukraine. Ukraine, for example, got back 6,057 of its fallen. Russia, a whopping 78. And that's not even a typo, 78. According to Vladimir Medinsky, the same Medinsky who was sent as the head of Russia's delegation, but who was not allowed to make any decisions, including which ice cream flavor he can get for lunch without prior written approval from the Kremlin. But okay, let's imagine these are real numbers. Now ask yourself, either the Russians are miracle warriors with single-digit losses, or the Kremlin is playing a heartless game with its own dead. Well, guys, we know which one is it. And the truth is, they just leave them. According to Zelensky, again, Russian forces often retreat from the battlefields and leave their own soldiers behind, whether dead or injured. Not because they cannot recover them, but because they do not want to admit those men ever existed. It is more convenient to abandon bodies than to process compensation paperwork, or to even explain yet another failed offensive. To be honest, for Russian generals, commanders, I don't even know what's worse. Missing is always much more ambiguous than KIA. Relatives always have hope while their father, son or brother is missing, and death or injury payments can be indefinitely postponed while the person is not yet found. Meanwhile, families wait, mothers pray, and the silence from Moscow is louder than any funeral wail. Interior Minister, for example, Igor Klimenko, even confirmed that Russian troops are sometimes disguised as Ukrainian casualties. The government that claims to protect the Russian people is literally disguising their corpses to avoid financial responsibility. What kind of dystopian circus is this? Next, let's talk about absolutely shocking numbers. And it will be clear why Putin is so afraid to admit this one thing. Let's talk about numbers that make Putin and the Kremlin sweat. Ukraine's general staff claims that over 1,010,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the invasion began. That's 1,000,000 broken bodies in more than 3 years. Even if you assume some exaggeration, the BBC Russian service and Media Zona have already verified over 111,000 Russian deaths alone. These are names, dates, family testimonies, real data. So was the Kremlin's official response. As always, shift the blame, call it fake news, discreditation of the Russian army, lie and distract. On the other hand, Russian media constantly inflates Ukrainian losses and celebrates ghost victories. If Kiev loses a trench, it's a triumph. If Russia loses an entire brigade, tens of thousands of people sometimes, it just never happened. This is not just denial, it's a full-scale war on truth. Zelensky said it best. The Kremlin's goal is to break the reality in which we live. And they are doing it with Photoshop, body swaps, and a state TV lineup that looks like it was scripted by Orwell's drunk cousin. This manipulation is not just for the show, it's a strategy. Because the minute Putin admits how many men have died, he risks his precious internal stability. Mobilization becomes impossible when the mothers of Russia realize their sons are not heroes, they're just fertilizer for somebody else's imperial fantasy. So Russia plays its old game. They show footage of Ukrainians in refrigerated trucks without revealing that this footage was filmed on Russian territory. They refuse to accept all-for-all POW swaps, because admitting how many prisoners they have lost would shatter the image of dominance. They push back on every number, every name, every face. And meanwhile, the families of the missing are left in everlasting limbo, told to wait for answers that will never come. This strategy of denial is not new, it's Soviet. It's Chechnya, Chechen wars, both of them all over again. But the scale is new, it's a dozen times more. The technology is new, and the desperation, that's reaching historic levels. What's the reason behind such enormous losses? The biggest one is the stubbornness of the Russian military leadership to deliver good news no matter the cost. You remember those cities, right? Bakhmut, Avdiivka, Mariupol. Yes, those cities are temporarily occupied, but at what cost? You would think they start learning from their mistakes, but no. Tens of thousands, 50,000 reportedly at least, are approaching now Sumy region. And as of recently, their advancement completely stalled. Will trench warfare begin now? That is a very good question, well, but highly unlikely. Will mid assaults continue? Well, that is much very probable. Let's talk about now Russia's most recent assault against Sumy in our next chapter. Let's now shift gears and head to the Sumy region, where the ground is soaked not just in blood, but also in governmental negligence. Ukraine's top general Alexander Syrsky visited the front lines and gave a rare bit of good news. Russia's advancement in northeastern Ukraine has been stopped. The line is holding, for now. But don't pop champagne yet. Syrsky admitted that fortifications in the area are weak, some dugouts are useless, and logistics corridors are still too vulnerable to Russian drones and artillery. What is this translated to? Ukraine did stop the Russian hammer, but the nail is still unfortunately shaking. Why is Sumy so important? Because it sits right on the border with Russia's Kursk region. Last year, Ukrainian troops made a shocking push into this Kursk territory. That stunt embarrassed the Kremlin so badly, Putin started ranting about so-called security buffer zones. We will talk also about them in one of our next chapters. And he was talking like he was playing some kind of SimCity video game with real lives. Fast forward to this spring, Russia poured 50,000 of its so-called best troops along the Sumy border and vowed to create a 10-kilometer kill zone. And yet, they stalled. And that stall comes at a price. Missiles continue to pummel the city. One of the most recent attacks, for example, eliminated unfortunately 34 civilians and wounded 117 of them. Entire neighborhoods are now rubble, but the line still holds. Ukrainian troops are improvising where resources fail. They are using homemade anti-drone nets, turning basements into triage centers, and digging deeper with every passing day. Yet morale in Sumy is something the Kremlin did not account for. This is not just some defense, it is defiance. Ukraine knows what happens if they fall back. Civilians will be the first ones to die. For Ukrainian soldiers, it is literally no step back is neither allowed nor possible. Russia does not care about civilian infrastructure. They bomb hospitals and schools like nothing, and call it a strategic engagement, and centers for taking important decisions by international mercenaries. So even under-equipped Ukraine for now holds. Meanwhile, deep state analysts confirm what Syrskyi fears. Combat is raging in unfortified zones. Some troops are basically sitting exposed. The shame here is not on the soldiers, it's on the leadership that waited too long to build. Fall 2024 was the golden window to reinforce Sumy when the front was calmer and the fight was on Russian territory. Unfortunately, that window now slammed shut. And now, Ukrainian troops pay the price for every shovel not used in time. And now finally, let's talk about Putin's latest fantasy, so-called buffer zones. That magic phrase he uses whenever he has run out of military options. He says, we don't plan to capture Sumy, last week for example, but I do not rule it out, so let's try to make it a buffer zone then, he continues. Yes, the classic tyrants maybe yes, but maybe not kind of situation. He's been deploying this rhetorical limb for months now, trying to convince the world that Russia is not desperate, it is just strategically patient. But we guys, let's call this what it is, a euphemism for bleeding soldiers for no reason. Russia's military is desperately trying to draw a line somewhere, anywhere, and that they can call a win, simple as that. The idea is to grab a few kilometers, slap a buffer zone label on it, and tell the folks back home that their sons did not die for nothing. But what is this buffer zone even? A field of ashes, a strip of scorched land between blown-up villages and minefields, the area that Russians were able to take away from Ukrainians, but are not fully controlling either. It's not strategic, it's not protected, it's just a graveyard waiting to happen. And while the Kremlin pats itself on the back for establishing depth, Ukrainian defenses are adapting. They are planting counter mines, jamming communication signals, even building fake trenches to lure drones and bombs into empty targets. It is not flashy by no means, but well, it works, and this is what is the most important. Meanwhile, Moscow is throwing troops into these buffer zones like wood into fire. And for what? To slow Ukrainian resistance by, I don't know, a few hours. To maybe delay a counteroffensive. Well, the truth is that these zones are bandages on an open fracture. They do not solve the war, they just prolong the suffering. And behind every new trench is another lie, another mother who would not get answers, another soldier who will not get buried, another death that Putin's media will erase from the record like it never happened. Well, there have it, guys. Also, by the way, I did another episode of Thank God It's Monday podcast. It is already uploaded on my channel. I speak with Jason J. Smart, probably the most requested person recently by you guys. Once again, if you haven't seen it, please go ahead and watch it. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow. Sway